In this video, we'll examine 10 dividends ETFs to consider for your retirement portfolio. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for weekly stock tips and investing strategies before we get started. What are ETFs? An exchange-traded fund, or ETF, is a grouping of many securities. Market indexes, commodities, industrial sectors, foreign exchange, fixed income, and other assets can all be the focus of ETFs. A mutual fund operates very similarly to an exchange-traded fund, ETF, however, mutual funds cannot be traded on stock exchanges. Investors can reduce risk by diversifying their holdings with the use of ETFs. How do ETFs help you in retirement? ETFs have a lot to offer, including respectable and reliable dividend payouts. ETFs also provide the mutual fund's benefits of diversity, which are frequently essential components of risk management. ETFs are appropriate for long-term investors who are putting money aside for retirement because they are less expensive to hold than individual stocks. You can invest in an industry ETF as an alternative to purchasing individual equities that are part of a given industry. You can lower your expenses and prepare for retirement by investing in specific ETFs that have low expense ratios and brokers that don't charge commissions on certain ETFs. Why invest in dividend ETFs? Exchange-traded funds that pay dividends not only assist you in diversifying your investment portfolio, but also in creating a source of passive income and building long-term wealth. Dividend ETFs are modeled after market indices that track stocks like ExxonMobil Corporation, AbbVie Incorporated, IBM, Chevron Corporation, Johnson & Johnson, and the Coca-Cola Company are safer investment options to consider, as opposed to investing in individual company stocks. Legendary value investor Warren Buffett shared his words of wisdom on the subject at the 2021 annual Berkshire Hathaway meeting. Mr. Buffett pointed out that individual stock picking is not for everyone and that most amateur investors are more likely to reduce their risk and maximize their profits by investing in low-cost index funds for longer periods. Let's review our 10 dividend ETFs to consider for retirement. Number 10. Victory Shares US Large Cap High Div Volatility WTD ETF, NASDAQ, CDL. Victory Shares US Large Cap High Div Volatility WTD ETF, CDL, is an exchange-traded fund launched and managed by Victory Capital Management Incorporated. The fund tracks the investment results of the NASDAQ Victory US Large Cap High Dividend 100 Volatility Weighted Index, which is a volatility-weighted index consisting of the top 500 U.S. companies by market capitalization. As of February 28, 2022, the CDL fund averaged annual returns totaled 12.29%. This is compared to the annual returns of the NASDAQ Victory US Large Cap High Dividend 100 Volatility Weighted Index, which returned 13.06% over the same period. The fund currently tracks 102 stocks, most of which are spread across the consumer staples, financials, and utility sectors. The CDL fund has a top 10 holdings concentration of 15.39% and tracks movements of dividend stocks that offer handsome yields, like Johnson & Johnson, PepsiCo, AbbVie Incorporated, Verizon Communications, and Chevron Corporation. Number 9. Fidelity High Dividend ETF, NYSE, FDVV. Fidelity High Dividend ETF NYSE, FDVV, is an exchange-traded fund launched and managed by Fidelity Management and Research Company LLC. The fund initiates long positions in growth and value stocks of companies of different market capitalizations. The fund is mapped on the Fidelity High Dividend Index. As of February 28, 2022, Fidelity High Dividend ETF, FDVV, annualized returns equal 21.90%, closely tracking the Fidelity High Dividend Index, which reported annualized returns of 22.28%. The fund has a gross expense ratio of 0.29%, which equals $29 annually per every $10,000 invested, and a trailing 12-month dividend yield of 2.75%. Fidelity High Dividend ETF has 115 holdings in total as of February 28, 2022. The fund's top 10 holdings concentration is 28.29%. Among Fidelity High Dividend ETF's top 10 holdings, we have ExxonMobil Corporation, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, Bank of America Corporation, and Chevron Corporation. Number 8. SPDR S&P Dividend ETF, NYSE, SDY. SPDR S&P Dividend ETF, NYSE, SDY, tracks the investment results that correspond to the total return performance of the S&P High Yield Dividend Aristocrats Index. The S&P High Yield Dividend Aristocrats Index tracks companies that have been consistent with their dividend increases for at least 20 years, which qualifies them as dividend aristocrats. This index contains stocks that have both capital growth and dividend income characteristics instead of stocks that offer only attractive yields. SPDR S&P Dividend ETFs 1-year annualized returns equaled 16.03%, closely tracking the S&P High Yield Dividend Aristocrats Index, which reported 1-year annual returns of 16.45% as of the end of February 2022. The fund offers a trailing 12-month yield of 2.71%. The fund's holdings are mainly concentrated in the financials, industrials, consumer goods, and utility sectors. The fund has a top 10 holdings concentration of 19.08% as of February end 2022. Among the fund's top holdings we see high-yielding dividend stocks such as ExxonMobil Corporation, AbbVie Incorporated, IBM, and Chevron Corporation. Number 7. Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, NYSE, VYM. Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, NYSE, VYM, tracks the FTSE High Dividend Yield Index, which consists of companies that offer high dividend yields. The fund follows a passive management full replication approach. Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF reported an average annual return of 18.96% on February 28, 2022. This is compared to the returns of the FTSE High Dividend Yield Index, which came to 19.04%. The fund's trailing 12-month yield sits at 2.82% and has an expense ratio of 0.06%. As of the end of February, Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, NYSE, VYM, has 413 stocks in its portfolio. The top 10 holdings of the fund include Johnson & Johnson, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, Bank of America Corporation, and the Coca-Cola Company. Number 6. Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, NYSE, SCHD. Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF mirrors the total return of the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index, the index it is modeled after. The index is comprised of stocks that offer sustainable dividends and have strong performance history. The fund has a trailing 12-month yield of 2.92% and an expense ratio of 0.06%, which equals $6 per $10,000 invested. Schwab US Dividend Equity ETFs, NYSE, SCHD, annualized 1-year returns were reported at 17.87% as of February 28, 2022. This is compared to the 1-year returns of the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index, which came to 18%. As of February 2022, the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, SCHD, has a top 10 holdings concentration of 40.37% and has stakes in 105 public equities. Among the fund's top holdings we see IBM, the Coca-Cola Company, PepsiCo Incorporated, and Verizon Communications Incorporated. The Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF can help you gain exposure to these stocks. Number 5. Victory Shares US Small Cap High Div Volatility WTD ETF, NYSE, CSB. The Victory Shares US Small Cap High Div Volatility WTD ETF is an ETF modeled after the Nasdaq Victory US Small Cap High Dividend 100 Volatility Weighted Index before fees and expenses. The fund offers exposure to small cap, dividend yielding US stocks. As of February 28, 2022, Victory Shares US Small Cap High Div Volatility WTD ETF's annualized returns stand at 8.79%, closely tracking the Nasdaq Victory US Small Cap High Dividend 100 Volatility Weighted Index, which generated annual returns of 9.37% for the same period. The CSB fund offers a gross expense ratio of 0.42% and has a trailing 12-month dividend yield of 3.17%. The fund's portfolio is populated with 103 small-cap stocks, most of which are concentrated in the financials, industrials, and utility segments. The fund has a top 10 holdings concentration of 15.60% as of February 28, 2022. Number 4. Ishares Core High Dividend ETF, NYSE, HDV. The Ishares Core High Dividend ETF tracks the performance results of the Morningstar Dividend Yield Focus Index, an index composed of relatively high dividend-paying U.S. equities. The fund uses a relative sampling technique to track these indexes' investment results. As of the end of February 2022, The average annualized returns of the Ishares Core High Dividend ETF, NYSE, HDV, came to 19.40%. This is compared to annualized one-year returns of 19.49% for the Morningstar Dividend Yield Focus Index over the same period. The Ishares Core High Dividend ETF has a top 10 holdings concentration of 55.29% as of February 28, 2022. The fund offers an attractive trailing 12-month yield of 3.37% and a budget-friendly expense ratio of 0.08%, which equals $8 annually per $10,000 invested. The Ishares Core High Dividend ETF holds positions in 81 public U.S. equities, of which the top 10 include Johnson & Johnson, the Coca-Cola Company, Chevron Corporation, AbbVie Incorporated, and Verizon Communications Incorporated. Number 3. WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend Fund, NYSE, DHS. WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend ETF is an exchange-traded fund modeled after the WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend Index, which is a weighted index that measures the performance of companies that offer high dividend yields. The fund was founded in 2006 by WisdomTree Investments Incorporated and is co-managed by Mellon Investments Corporation. As of February 28, 2022, WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend ETFs average annualized returns equal 24.42%, which tracks closely to the WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend Index's returns of 25.01% over the same period. The fund's trailing 12-month yield stands at 3.20%. On February 23, 2022, WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend Fund declared a monthly distribution of $0.0450. The distribution was payable on February 25, 2022, to shareholders of record on February 23, 2022. The top 10 holdings concentration of WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend Fund as of the end of February 2022 is 44.29%. The fund's holdings mostly comprised companies that belong to the healthcare, consumer defensive, energy, and financial sectors. ExxonMobil Corporation, AbbVie Incorporated, Chevron Corporation, the Coca-Cola Company, and Verizon Communications Incorporated were among the top 10 holdings of the WisdomTree U.S. High Dividend Fund, NYSE, DHS. Number 2. Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF, NYSE, SPHD. Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF seeks to track the performance of the S&P 500 Low Volatility High Dividend Index, which is comprised of 51 stocks traded on the S&P 500 index that have a history of delivering yields and low volatility. The fund's trailing 12-month yield is 3.42% and its gross expense ratio is 0.30%. In February 2022, Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF declared a monthly distribution of $0.1425. The 30-day SEC yield of the ETF was 3.98% as of February 2022. At the end of February 2022, the annualized one-year returns for Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF were reported to be 18.67%. This is compared to the S&P 500 Low Volatility High Dividend Index, which returned 19.05% as of February 2022. Some of the most notable holdings of the Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF are Chevron Corporation, Altria Group Incorporated, and Verizon Communications Incorporated. The fund's top 10 holdings concentration as of February 2022 was 27.59%. Number 1. Invesco High Yield Equity Dividend Achievers ETF, NYSE, PEY. Invesco High Yield Equity Dividend Achievers ETF mirrors and tracks the performance of the Nasdaq US Dividend Achievers 50 Index, which contains stocks that have high dividend yields and consistent dividend growth. The ETF has a trailing 12-month yield of 3.88% and a gross expense ratio of 0.53%. As of February 2022, the Invesco High Yield Equity Dividend Achievers ETF declared a monthly distribution of $0.0724, at which time the ETF had a 30-day SEC yield of 4.04%. The monthly distribution was payable on February 28, 2022, to shareholders of record on February 23, 2022. As of February 2022, the annualized one-year returns for Invesco High Yield Equity Dividend Achievers ETF came out to 18.03%, closely tracking the Nasdaq US Dividend Achievers 50 Index, which returned 18.56% over the same period. Which of these 10 dividends ETFs would you like to add to your retirement portfolio? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for weekly stock investing strategies and tips. Thank you for watching.